This episode is brought to you by Parma Token, a Crypto.com tracked token. Parma gives you access to exclusive community experiments and no team or pre-sale tokens. Parma is a deflationary coin with over 50% of its tokens burned at the launch and 1% burned on each transactional event. Visit parmatoken.com for more details on acquiring this awesome token. Link in the description below.
This my two Satoshis, who need 2 cents when they can get double from stacking Toshis, yeah.
Hola, what's going on, GNGs? I'm Shrek with 2Ks, and this is another episode of My Two Satoshis. I got a couple of crypto stories of things that have happened in the last 24 hours, and I would argue one or two of them are definitely like watershed moments. There is a line being crossed right now in the crypto space that I don't think a lot of people are either putting in context or acknowledging the gravity of this thing right now. And so the first story is going to get into Consensus. If you don't know who Consensus is, shout outs to Reggie Middleton for dropping this one and bringing it to Twitter's attention. Also, Evan Van Ness, I don't know who he is, Evan Van Ness. And big shout outs to Gaston, because he was the one who actually dropped it in the group. I think that was last night or this morning. I don't exactly remember. Nonetheless, though, this basically is a lawsuit situation happening with the big name, the head guy that everyone knows, Joseph Lubin, in the company called Consensus. What most people don't understand, I'm gonna jump into this other article that kind of broke down what was actually going on or what is going on in the situation right now, in that the shareholders who were in the original Consensus company are saying that there needs to be a special investigation using what they call Swiss Code of Obligations. Because I think it's in 2020, they're saying that Lubin took fundamental IP, intellectual property, and then he switched it over into another Consensus company called Consensus Software Incorporated from Consensus AG, right? And so these shareholders are like, hey, things is kind of screwy. What's going on? You kind of gutted the company and took away what was the bread and butter of the quote original company. Most folks outside of the company or in the business side of this blockchain crypto space don't understand in regards to this distinction. It is a very important distinction. The reason why this is a very important distinction, and I'll have the link for this in the description, is because what it is being allegated that Lubin did was he set up the other company, then moved X amount of the intellectual property that was like the key stuff over to the other company. And he also did some other assets as far as companies, right? Part of how what is connected to him doing this is that there's a report called Project North Star, where JP Morgan is then supposed to also get some stake in two of the major breadwinners for Consensus, which is MetaMask and this other back-end company. When I say back-end company, I'm talking about if you're not on the tech side of it and know how to deal with the infrastructure stuff, that's the back-end stuff that I'm talking about. So this is MetaMask. If you don't know what MetaMask is, it is a web-based wallet that deals with what is being marketed as Web3 stuff, but pretty much majority of the blockchain related companies that have websites that sell stuff like NFTs and use smart contracts are really front end Web2 stuff. But I'm not going to run down that rabbit hole. So MetaMask is like the number one player in the smart contract based wallets that you need as far as dealing with NFTs and like those upgraded kind of sites, right? So Uniswap, 1inch, OpenSea, all of those different platforms. And then the other company is called Infura. Infura, like I said, is the back end part of the way to connect blockchains to the websites and like the different front end options that you could offer on your website. That's where Infura sits in this. They offer the APIs. Their target audience as far as use case and stuff, this is for the devs. This isn't for traders and regular hodler folks. This is for the back end folks. But the point being is that this particular case happened, and this is stuff that trekked all the way back to, let's say, 2019, 2020. What I find interesting in this, like I said, I'm gonna have the article in it, but they give like a little timeline of when things were happening as far as like when he made the transition with the separating of the company, starting a new thing, the other guy who was also the co-founder. 2020, there's a part that they talk about how he told the rest of the company, hey, we're gonna downsize, right? And now I would argue the downsizing thing and them doing like the move of getting X amount of the Wall Street daddy folks in on the back end probably started in 2018 or 2019. And I say this because 2019, I was at the office opening in DC. I knew a number of people who had originally, recently got hired over into Consensus. Everybody's happy, everybody's celebrating. A couple of weeks later, I was in Chile at a conference in the capital, Santiago. I'm in the conference, we're in the hallway, having our hallway con stuff. Somebody comes over to me and is like, yo, Consensus is letting people go. What? I instantly text somebody back in the States that I know who works there. And I'm like, yo, what's going on? I say all of that to say this. I've heard on more than one occasion that the way that the company is run is not the most upfront and transparent. And I'm not saying they haven't helped to bring companies and products into the space that are very useful. They definitely have. But there are certain things as far as the business transparency. And when we talk about the original ideals of the crypto space, as far as being censorship resistant, as far as being open source and it's open to everyone, some of these CeFi companies, they're not about that. Like, they really not about that. I'll give you another example of something. What was it? Last year, Consensus has a blockchain education program, right? And so I think it was either December or might have been November. There were a number of students who are located in Iran. Consensus just dropped them. It was like, hey, here's an email. I think there was an email, but it wasn't like, hey, you have a month's notice. It was like, hey, we're gonna have to let you go. Sorry, you don't get no accreditation for doing our program. You don't get to walk away with anything that says, oh, this person knows blah, 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 because they've been in the program for so long. They just dropped them. Why? Because there was from what I understand, there is an embargo in regards to certain types of education. CeFi companies that deal in education are under this particular thing of, hey, you can't teach certain people this open source free technology that is supposed to lower the barrier to entry and be open to all. Consensus did that. There's no explanation. Nobody really talked about it. I will say I did bring it up on my LinkedIn channel, but again, nobody really talked about it. Why? Because those are the bad people. Just saying. Moving on to the next thing though, right? If you're interested, I'll definitely have the link for this. You can read more about the details. Also, and I'm not giving financial advice to anybody, but at the end of this, they also talk about if you were one of the original shareholder people that was in this Consensus setup from the beginning, you might want to reach out to this email that's like right here. All right, you'll find it in the article when you want to read it yourself. Also, sorry to hear, or I don't know, this might be a good thing in regards to for Reggie's situation, because he actually right now is the only one who holds a patent that's recognized by the U.S. Patent Office that is in relation to distributed ledger technology. Like it or not, it exists, y'all. All of us rebel and be outside the wall garden, DeFi folks. We think how we think, we operate how we operate. But when you're talking about CeFi, when you're talking about patent stuff, when you're talking about jurisdictions, it exists, it's here. Again, another thing that is, in my opinion, is not being addressed within the crypto space and the gravity of what that means, especially for what Consensus just did, right? Where they took the intellectual property and switched it over to another company. And then they also sideways made a deal with JP Morgan, which I would also wonder, does that mean that JP Morgan gets to have some ownership to what they're saying is their intellectual property? Where does that sit in relation to Reggie Middleton's patent that is officially recognized by the US government and Japan? I don't know, but we're gonna find out at some point this decade. I at least see that. Nonetheless, moving on to the next story, right? I'm gonna preface this one with this particular article with a backdrop story. In one of the Telegram groups I'm in, somebody dropped this in like yesterday morning about how Ukraine is like, hey, we're gonna do airdrops for the people who donated. Word? Okay. So now I go through and I read this article and I'm just like, I don't really trust this. And I've been saying this the last couple of days. I am really curious as to who is the firm that is doing the vice prime minister's social media strategy, who's advising him on that, as well as who's also dealing with this crypto side for them. Because I really think the strategies have been very ingenious and effective for what is arguably their goal of in part doing sideways economic sanctions by directly applying or pleading to companies directly through social media that target individual people, not just the government, as well as being able to arguably, this was crowdfunding, AKA ICO stuff, right? And so looking at this article, they're talking about how the Ukrainian government is like, hey, we're going to do an airdrop for the people who ended up, sending us some crypto. Some of it was in BTC, some of it was in Ethereum apparently, and they basically racked it all in, right? Now, there were a couple of things that kind of got me in regards to like how this could be gamed. And leading into the next actual part of this, it did end up getting gamed. A scammer did make his way in, or their way in, or whoever. When it was dropped in the group, I read through and I was like, I don't know. This doesn't look too copacetic. This could be a honeypot. This could be, you end up doing this, and then what happens when you got to deal with OFAC? You got to deal with your taxes. You got to deal with like having foreign assets. Remember, this would be a foreign government that gave you this thing, right? So now you have to claim it. And at some point, in my mind, there was going to be a KYC element in regards to this. I'm gonna jump into this next one right here, which is the second half of it. Not even a full, let's say 24 hours later, I'm listening to King and the Gentleman of Cryptos this morning, and then he talks about this article. Ukraine cancels the token airdrop. Wait, but what happened? I thought y'all took a snapshot of the blockchains that you were looking to utilize this airdrop on, and everything was copacetic. Apparently not. Again, I'm still wondering who is the firm that is advising them, and like how knowledgeable are they in practical execution. And I do understand there's a whole bunch of other things playing out right now on the economic front, on the geopolitical, maneuvers and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we talking about this being crypto and it's open to all. And I've been saying this for a while, honestly, that just like people are free to use this open source technology for their end goals, governments are free to do the same thing. And this cobblestone road to mass adoption is bottom line gonna have shit on it. Like, it's gonna be growing pains. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There are gonna be things that we do like, things that we don't like. Case in point, some people didn't like that you could do this as far as the government. I would argue that this was a rug pull. I'm also co-signing on something that I heard King say today, that when I thought about it more, I definitely agree on the end of, they did a switch and bait. They did a bait and switch, right? So now here it is. We tell you we're gonna do this airdrop. And so that brought in the speculators. Apparently the amount, I think they got up to like 50 million at a certain point. They were able to get up to, I believe it was 50 million in value. But that push of pushing it up to 50 million only came in after the government announced the airdrop. So that means a number of speculators were trying to jump in. Some people might be like, well, why don't you just, try to do a refund? This is crypto. If you were sending directly from your personal wallet into the wallet address that they showed as far as being the Ukrainian government's thing, hey, that's it. It only works one way, unless the person on the other side decides to send it back to you. So that's where that is right now. And I'm going to jump into a little bit in regards to the scam that happened. So apparently somebody was definitely lying in wait. At least this is how it looks on the surface of the story, right? Someone or a group of people were sitting lying in wait. And when the time came up as far as when the official Ukrainian government airdrop would happen, they stepped in beforehand. And that's what this article actually covers, that they stepped in beforehand and did a fake airdrop. And so as it sits right now, let me read this line to you once I say this point. And so as it sits right now, they're kind of saying, hey, we had to reconsider and like think things over. And so because of what happened with the scammer jumping before them, we are now going to pull back, and then we're going to look at doing a NFT project. Arguably, this is ICO tactics. This is ICO stuff where you pull the funds in and then you're like, oh, well, we told you we had like a project or an idea, or we were going to do things. And if you remember about like the 2016-17 period of how it was a lot of vaporware companies, it was a lot of forks of companies just doing a copy and paste white paper, a copy and paste blockchain, and then they sucked at the execution, or the project eventually just died off because they lost the momentum and they weren't able to deliver what they were promising. And some people just didn't deliver anything at all, right? So I would wonder, in this scenario here, what does this mean for the people who are in other countries and jurisdictions who donated to this? Also to note, there are Russians who are against the war, right? But we have it that some centralized exchanges have blocked people in Russia. So the people who were pro-Ukrainian can't actually do this through CeFi type of, or CEX's CEX, centralized exchanges, support this, or we're not able to support this. But for the ones who did, now what? You were anti-war, you sent donations over to the Ukrainian crypto address that was promoted on Twitter, and I think it was on one of their like home websites or whatever. Now what? You don't get your funds back, and you don't actually know what they're going to do going forward. I'm gonna wrap all of this up to say this. Oh, another thing I want to point out too, on the MetaMask front, MetaMask actually started blocking certain wallets based on IP addresses. So wherever you're operating your MetaMask website out of, they started blocking those. So that's a whole nother thing onto itself. But I want to wrap all of this up to say this, right? In the last 24 hours, the month of March has arguably just like stepped up and been on par with the things that were going on in February, in that we are having some very big watershed moments in untested territory as far as, hey, the technology is open source to everyone. What does this mean when governments start utilizing it in this manner? What does this mean when another government says, well, no, we can't have our people use it this way? This is a cat and mouse game that, for how the technology works. I'm not talking about price speculation. I'm not talking about trading. I'm not talking about financial advice. I'm talking about how the technology at base level works. It's a cat and mouse game that we're in right now. And there are a number of parties involved at local levels, state levels, city levels, geopolitical country levels that have various agendas in, right? Some people are doing a lot of virtue signaling and having people take the left or the right side on how the technology should be used, what you should or should not support. At the end of the day, I would say I'm Andresian after Andreas Antonopoulos in my school of thought about this crypto use case as far as who should or shouldn't use it. It's an open source technology. It's open for everyone, or at least in my, OG mentality, and I use that phrase loosely as far as OG, it should be open for everyone. Now, if you do use it in a certain way that might already be something that like makes sense to be illegal, case in point, sex trafficking, things like that, yeah, like you already committed the other crime. You should be in jail. I'll say it that way, right? There are things happening that I think going through the rest of this year, there's some things we could predict about how the growing pains and this road to mass adoption would be and play out. And there are just some things that we could not predict. We don't know what some of the actions that are happening now, what is it going to mean in 6 months? What is it going to mean in 3 years? Nonetheless, I would definitely implore people if you are still hesitant about being in crypto in any capacity, at least start paying attention to take the time to learn the base level of the tech and like X amount of like what's going on the news side, because things are just happening ridiculously fast. Like these stories that I just talked about were literally the last 48 hours. No, 3 days, 72 hours. 72 hours. Majority was the last 48 hours though. Nonetheless, I'm Shrek with 2Ks. This is another episode of My Two Satoshis. And you gotta let Crypto Blood know, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? Like, share, and leave something in the comment. If you tell me I suck, I'm okay with that. I work on getting better. Also, if you want to actually get more of my like expanded thoughts on stuff, or more of the expanded thoughts on things, I'm heavy on LinkedIn. Twitter's more of like my rambles or just the randomness of whatever comes out of my carnival, which is this thing right here, the brain bucket. And I'm gonna leave it on that one. Last thing. This is sponsored by Cigar Recon. If you about that smoke life, if you about putting cigar smoke in the air, check out cigarrecon.com. And my guy Dante, he also does crypto. So even if you don't got the fiat, you got some crypto, you can still get some cigars, man. It's a good line. And let's leave it at that one. Other than that, G&Gs, have a P over B day. That means have a productive over busy day. All right, y'all. 1.